Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this year's Industry Plus Intelligence at Winter Online. I am Maggie Bittner, Head of Education for SIA, and so pleased to welcome our panelists today who are going to give us an update on this very unique ski season that we are having. Kristin Carpenter is here as our moderator. We have Melanie Mills from Colorado Ski Country, Michael Reitzell from Ski California, Mahar from Ski Vermont, and Nathan Rafferty from Ski Utah. Kristin, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And I'm so very, very happy that all of these panelists could be here today. We have a literal dream team with us to really obtain some great information and news from different super important regions across the country. My name is Kristin Carpenter. I'm the founder and CEO of Verde Brand Communications, the host of the Channel Mastery podcast. And I have the honor of doing lots of panels for SIA. Haven't been here for a while. It's wonderful to be back, and especially with this great group of people here today. The second I learned about this panel, I wanted to attend it, let alone lead it. So we have a great, I think, learning opportunity for everybody today. And you may remember at the beginning of fourth quarter or so last year, SIA ran a panel with some resort operators, and it literally just felt like we were stepping through every hour of every day, like not really knowing what was going to happen next. And now we have the opportunity to actually hear how things are going. We're past holiday and we're, well into January. So obviously we're still facing a lot of uncertainty. And one of the most interesting facets and learning opportunities today is the fact that we have these leaders from different states and regions. Everybody is dealing with their own version of, managing the pandemic and the acceleration that it's brought, as well as different consumer mindsets. Since Maggie already introduced the panel, I'm just going to go ahead to maximize our time today. I want to just drop right into the questions. And keep in mind, I'm going to guide this with questions, but we're hoping it'll be a conversation of sorts. We are not able to take questions on the platform, but I believe that, the people on the panel have so much experience that they've earned this year, the hard way probably, and so much to share that I just want to encourage everybody, like if you do feel like you want to go into a different direction or even ask each other a few things that you think that the audience would benefit from Winter Online, please don't hesitate to do that. Okay, with that, I would like to start with Nathan, who is obviously with Ski Utah. Some of Utah's resorts have required reservations and others haven't, Nathan. I was hoping you could kick off our panel today by talking through the state of reservations in your state and how you're working to inform and resource not only your workforce and I guess the operations leads, but also the end consumer. You really carry an interesting role at Ski Utah, so I thought you'd be a great person to start with.
Thanks, Kristin. Well, first, I'd like to give a shout out to my fellow panelists. We've all been meeting weekly since the pandemic began. Mike Reitzell from Ski California has kind of led the charge there, and it's been great to get together with all these guys. And for me, more than anything, it's a bit of a therapy session. It's nice to learn what's happening in these other states, but it's nice to hear that we're not alone in some of the challenges that we face. So that's been fun. Getting back to reservations. So we've got 15 resorts here in Utah. Only one of them requires reservations for skiing. In this COVID world, it feels like there's reservations for everything. So skiing shouldn't be too much different. And that's Park City, so that's our largest ski area in the state. In fact, the largest in the U.S. And then the other place we've got reservations, kind of a significant, reservation is at Snowbird, and it's not for skiing, but it's for parking. So it's overall, I think it's been good. It's like everything in the pandemic, kind of a rocky start for everybody, I think, in a little bit, but once we found our groove and people really understood why they were making reservations and how it might help them, I think it worked out pretty well. I can't totally speak for Park City, but I do know certainly for Snowbird, the reservation system, everybody freaks out at first because obviously they want to ski when they want to ski, and if it snows overnight, they want to get up and go. But some of the upsides, I think, have been that especially for the parking at Snowbird, is that families have, and I've seen this firsthand, some of the emails that Snowbird has received, some level of assurance that they don't have to get their kids in the car and out the door at 7:30 in the morning to, hope to get a spot at the resort, and they can actually show up at 9:30 or 10 o'clock if that's what they choose, because they have that reservation. So, we talked a little bit about, before this panel started, the theme of COVID being things cutting both ways. You give up a little bit of on the spot spontaneity, but what you gain is some assurance. And I think that's true for the skiing, also reservations at Park City. And by and large, I think that's going pretty well. We also have reservations at many of our resorts dining facilities. So one that I could highlight is Deer Valley. And again, one of the nicer sides there is they've got a pretty slick online system where you can choose your date, whether you're breakfast or lunch, and your location. And if you, plan ahead, which is part of our big communication and PR push at Ski Utah this year, that you've got a spot at Deer Valley on the busiest day of the year for lunch at 12:15 at Silver Lake, if that's what you want. But it just requires a little bit of planning ahead. So we've been at Ski Utah, through our many PR channels, we've been, preaching planning ahead. So hopefully that helps answer your question there, Kristin.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love your point about kind of the contrast of what's been difficult and what's actually working. And ultimately, you're creating a different experience for the consumer, but I love that you're pointing out the value that brings. Melanie, I'd love to also ask you to address the same question, the process and protocol of reservations for Colorado. Obviously, we got through the holidays. I'd love to have you share your take on what's working and what's not with Colorado's reservation system.
Thanks, Kristin. And I'd echo Nathan's comment about how great it is to be on a panel with this group of people and with you. So hello, everyone from Colorado. And just one thing before I dive into talking about reservations, remember the reason that we all are thinking about reservations or having target numbers in our ski areas. We all went into the season saying, we want to do this right as an industry. We want to provide for social distancing. We don't want to overwhelm our facilities. We don't want to have a Lake of the Ozarks moment in our industry where we just see huge, massive crowds of people that look like super spreader events. So the intention that went into every ski area's plan in terms of managing their numbers was really built on that premise. We want people to be safe. We want our employees to be safe. We don't want to be hotspots for COVID transmission. And here in Colorado, we took a real resort by resort approach to that system. Our state went along with that. There was not a one size fits all, everybody's got to have a reservation system dictate. And there really are kind of three different types of reservations here in Colorado. You've got certain areas that have reservation requirements for season pass holders. Those tend to be the larger areas that have very, very large numbers of passes in the marketplace, and especially in the local marketplace. You've got parking reservations, which we have at 2 of our areas in Colorado. And those, again, don't necessarily limit the ski area's numbers because you can have as many people in a vehicle as you want. Doesn't limit local transit options. And then the third method of reservations, if you will, is all the pre-sale requirements for day tickets. That in and of itself acts as another type of reservation, because a ski area can say, if we look at our modeling, looks like we're going to have a busy weekend or a busy Saturday. We can limit the number of day tickets that we sell and make sure that we don't get overwhelmed that way. And we have most of our areas in Colorado using pre-purchase of day ticket requirements to help us manage the day-to-day fluctuations in business. We've been very successful using reservation systems of these three types at moving people from weekends to weekdays, shaving the peaks and evening out the flow of visitation a little bit. It's helped us to manage our indoor facilities and make sure that they don't get overwhelmed, because here in Colorado, most of the ski towns have 25% occupancy limitations on their restaurants. So that's been a plus. We're able to know what the demand looks like in advance. That's something that I think will move on beyond this season. And some of the cons are, people are disappointed. I heard someone on an SIA panel real early in the season, Kristin, talk about how we sold a lot of people the all-you-can-eat buffet. And after we sold them the all-you-can-eat buffet, now we put some limitations on that. And so sometimes people are disappointed that they can't get the day or the days that they want, or that their friends can't get the same days that they did. It's a little bit of an imperfect system, especially for destination visitors. If somebody has traveled a long way, there are some challenges there. And we're still managing the no-show situation when somebody makes a reservation and doesn't show up. But as Nathan said, there have been pros, there have been cons. It's really hard at this point in the year to assess what reservations would look like in a more normal snow year. In us in Colorado, snow has been more of a limiting factor at this point than these other COVID operating restrictions. So more to come, I think, and we'll have to revisit your question later in the season.
Thank you. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Molly is our East Coast representative today. Welcome, Molly. It's great to have you here, obviously with Ski Vermont. Your season was kicked off by, well, not entirely, but I know there was an article in the New York Times that was published before Thanksgiving speculating about Vermont's resorts being impacted, particularly with a huge challenge around the pandemic due to your state's restrictions. Nathan, you mentioned PR. I'm obviously in PR. That is definitely not something I would have wanted to manage around. The article was titled "Vermont Ski Season on the Brink," which obviously is clickbait in my opinion, but point being is I'd love to hear what it's actually been like for you now that you're in mid-January to look at that, commitment that visitors to Vermont have had to be, 14-day quarantine or quarantine of 7 days followed by a negative COVID test. You really hold a special spot on the panel in terms of having to navigate that. And I'd love for you to share your experiences with us today.
Sure. Thanks, Kristin. Well, I do want to say thank you to SIA for inviting me to be on the panel today, and I am certainly in great company. So yes, these restrictions are still in place, alive and well, and this has really contributed to a pretty difficult business climate for tourism and the ski industry in general. Certainly in a state like Vermont that is so heavily dependent on tourism for our economy. And unfortunately, we saw a tightening of these restrictions just right before the ski season started, as we started to see cases start to tick up in the Northeast. So that was unfortunate. The state did add a couple of fairly large pieces to our operating guidance in early November, and certainly not their fault for the timing. They're trying to react to this very fluid situation as well. But one of which was to help enforce the state's travel restrictions by requiring that each guest sign an attestation that they were aware of and following Vermont's travel restrictions. So from a timing perspective, as I said, this was really challenging because that was a system that didn't really exist. So we had to kind of scramble and get those systems into place because we got it so close to ski season, which did start a little bit later than normal as it was. However, it's been good in the sense that we are working with the state to communicate and educate about the restrictions, and that started, well before the ski season started, and that, is up to and including getting that attestation from the guest. The difficulty has really been that the attestation turns on the honor system. It's really virtually impossible for ski areas or the state to prove or disprove that someone has or has not quarantined. So, that's been challenging. And it has led to some friction with some Vermont residents who, are unhappy about people coming into the state. The state's travel restrictions have just really highlighted that. We do have some of the strongest state guidance and operating guidance, I should say, in the country. And as challenging as that was due to timing, it has been helpful for that in-state perception. We've also seen a number of people relocating to Vermont, at least maybe temporarily or perhaps permanently, as many people can work remotely. So that's been good. And I would say, fortunately, we have kept a really open channel with our state's Commerce Department. So we're hearing any concerns that they have pretty much real time, and we can stay on top of them. Our state is following what the contact tracing data is showing them in terms of adjusting guidance and restrictions. They want to keep business open as long as it can be done safely. And fortunately, so far, there hasn't been data to show that ski areas or people from out of state are causing, COVID issues or an uptick in cases. And we obviously know that being outside is the best place to be right now. So that's been great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'd love to go over to Michael over in the state of California. I think that you've earned a PhD and we were really curious to hear about, how you did this. But obviously your state has issued a lot of restrictions and you've managed to stay open throughout them. What is it you're doing over there? I'll have what he's having.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and I love being on here with our colleagues from the state associations. It's been great to have them on a call every week, although I'm sure we probably would prefer if maybe we weren't going that route. But yeah, California is California. We sometimes like to do our own thing, and this definitely was probably the biggest challenge, I'd say, of my career, but also one of the best outcomes that we received. It really started with inserting ourselves in the conversation. Over the summer, California was very focused on developing guidance for any industry that was open. So you weren't going to be open unless they had given you some form of guidance as to how that would happen. So we said, okay, well, we need to get into the governor's office and talk to the right person because in California, doing that is not that easy. We're not Disney or Napa Valley or even beach communities. We're a small industry, even though we have, our 30 plus resorts here, we're still considered small in California. So we just leveraged some of our existing relationships to get to the right person in the governor's office. We found out who it was that was working on that guidance. And then we actually gave them a little bit of time because it was July. And we made them aware that, hey, we're here ready to talk to you, but we understand that you've got a lot of other industries right now that maybe are in front of us, but don't forget about us. And doing that was really helpful because when we did decide to make the decision to step in and say, hey, ski season's coming up, we've been planning for this already for several months. If you're going to require guidance, we need to be involved in that, and we want to be involved in that. So we did that. Again, connected with the right person, opened that line of communication. At one point, even resisted the urge to go over that person's head because someone had told us you got to go higher. But we actually listened to the amusement industry, and they said, "Hey, stick with this. It's the only way you're going to get where you want to go." So we did that, and then the next thing we did was assemble a team for the project. So I grabbed 5 of the best people from our industry. And I'd like to actually call them out because they were so amazing in all of this. It was Amy Oran from Boreal, John Rice, who's our current chair from Sierra Tahoe. These are names that I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with. Greg Dallas, who runs Sugar Bowl, Ron Cohen from Squaw Valley Alpine Meadows. So we knew we needed that Altera aspect with us. And then also we brought in Pete Sontag, who runs all the Western resorts for Vail Resorts, to be involved. And that group was phenomenal. Being able to bounce the necessary ideas off of each other to deal with some really tough questions from the state. So what we did is we were really proactive in getting guidance drafted for them. we didn't want them. We didn't even know who was going to be writing this, whether they knew anything about skiing or they knew about how our operations worked. So we went ahead and just drafted it for them and told them what needed to be in it. And they, for the most part, I think they took that, but really to speed up kind of how we ultimately pulled this off at the end, we had to really push on them. We were in mid-October and they still had not gotten us anything. So we've been talking to them for about 6 weeks and our resorts are talking about opening. So our resorts opened without any guidance. That was the challenging part, but we sort of put that on them that they hadn't gotten back to us. So the day before Thanksgiving at 3 o'clock on a Zoom call, the California Department of Public Health presented us with the guidance. We didn't get a copy of it in advance. We basically got shown it on a screen and we picked out all the parts of it that we knew were going to be a major problem for us. And there were several. We spent that evening, myself and our team, in 6 different locations, drafting new guidance on all the parts we knew were going to be challenging. And so we did that I think it was 7 o'clock at night before Thanksgiving, and we got that back to them. And then things didn't turn so well. On November 30th, I got a call from the governor's office and a text from the governor's office. And I think this is a good lesson in that it started off by hoping they would read my email, maybe hoping they would get my call, to the point where they were calling and texting with us. So I think we really developed that relationship to make sure that it was working. And we did that because we were transparent, we were upfront, and we listened to what they said to us. But that call was not a good one because it was asking me to be on a call with the head of the Department of Public Health and a bunch of other state associations and other industries, pretty much to tell us that they were going to shut down the state and that we as the ski industry were going to be part of that. So that night I got together with our team again, came up with as many arguments as we could. We got on that call the next morning, pushed myself to the front of the line, pleaded our case, did a follow-up email that afternoon explaining why we needed to be open. And I got a call at 4 o'clock that day on December 1st saying they were shutting down the state again. Oh, but by the way, here's your new guidance. It had everything in it we needed to operate successfully. And also you can stay open through any stay-at-home order. And I sort of pinch myself every time I see a news article or something on the media saying everything's closed, but you can go skiing. So it was really great the way we pulled that off. The 2 big takeaways really were keeping that line of communication open at all times, to the point where I could just pick up my phone and text them and say, hey, here's what's going on. And they've followed up with us since then to say that, you know, our resorts are doing a great job. And then last, just assembling a great team. I mean, if we didn't have the input from all different angles, we wouldn't have had those arguments that we needed to help us stay open. And so here we are, January 19th. It's been tough because the stay-at-home order is really challenging on our resorts, to the point where it's, I'm not taking credit for this because someone else on this call here coined this, but we were really down to skiing and peeing. And we've done a pretty good job of it. But we're coming out of it now with Tahoe being out of the stay-at-home order. Very thankful where we are, and just ready to try to make it through this season.
You know, it's really no wonder that you guys have had group therapy after hearing that story. That is a fantastic story, and I understand it's still unfolding, but there's just so much for us to learn. Molly, you echoed this too, staying close to the state and offer as much proactive help as possible, make their job easy, stay connected. Even when you think you might be being annoying, I'm sure you're just kind of, what can I do to help further this along? That's absolutely fantastic. So that's a heartening story, and I really appreciate it.
Good.
Go ahead, Melanie.
I would just jump in and you know, give a plug to all these guys and to state associations in general. You know, most of us have a few gray hairs and have worked in the industry for a number of years, and part of our job is to have relationships in the governor's office and with the governor's team and as governors change and all those kinds of things. But the lift this year was really at a whole nother level. I mean, in Colorado, I was talking to the governor's office and the governor's team every single day, sometimes twice a day, over a period of several months as we were developing our guidance and getting ski area plans approved. And it just, it was at a whole different level. So a shout out to all my fellow panelists for the work that it took to get to the point where ski areas in our states were allowed to open this year. It was a project.
And if I could jump in and just say, these are the things that, give a plug for associations. These are the things that make associations valuable. And, we have these relationships. You never know when you're going to need them. And man, we needed them this year. And so, having people that have spent the time at fundraisers and all these fun rubber chicken events that we go to with legislators and governor's offices, man, they pay dividends when you need them.
I just want to say, I'm just hearing Mike's story again, was so impressive. And the tough part of a lot of this negotiation is with the state is that we are negotiating from a place of weakness, really, because, like our governor is very focused on the public health aspect of this thing, and the economy is important, but that's secondary to public health. And so, just trying to push back on some of this stuff. We were successful in some cases and not successful in others. So it was a little bit of a nail biter, because if you knew you had something important, you just, you didn't know if you couldn't lean on that economy card, to pull it through.
I guess one thing I'm curious about, since you are, something that just kind of occurred to me is the offices of outdoor recreation have stood up in the past, 5-6 years. And you guys have been in a version of that office for some time, or your position within that has been there. So it's almost like there's an additive component with those offices being stood up, but at the same time, the focus on outdoor recreation and wellness has been absolutely huge. I'm curious if you might chime in and say, like, do you think that was something that helped grease the wheels a little bit, just in terms of like the wellness that being outdoors has provided, but also just that strong demand that, whether it's people moving to these beautiful towns where you're operating your resorts, or, whether it's just the overarching theme of COVID, which is outdoor recreation, cycling, et cetera. Do you think that might have helped a little bit? I'm curious.
Yeah, for sure. We use that card, the wellness, physical and mental wellness card, and we played it and we continue to play it. The other thing that all really leaned on in our states was to say, look, people are going to go outside and recreate, and they have to get out of their homes. They have to get outside, and ski areas provide a structured place for people to go where we can manage distancing, we can manage group size gathering, we can manage the number of people who are indoors in a facility all at one time. So I don't think it was any one component of the reasons that skiing is great for all of our states, but it was really a combination. We played every single one of the cards we had in our deck this year.
I'd agree with Melanie, and I think it bore itself out too when we were saying that there needs to be this outlet for people in the wintertime, and here we are in January, and I can tell you our government officials are glad that the ski areas are open and they see people recreating, and just from a mental health perspective, to being able to have these businesses open and operating, never mind the couple $2 billion of revenue that the state depends on, but just having something for the citizens of the state to do that's healthy and active and outdoors.
Yeah, that I gotta say, we use that kind of cut both ways, because we already had in the state, I think the government thought right away, getting outside, mental health, very important. So we didn't really have to play that. But what happened is they saw that people were getting outside in such huge numbers and they were congregating places. So we had to combat that aspect of it. And it goes to what Melanie said, that, we said, look back in April, in March, when we decided to shut down, and we voluntarily shut down. No one told us we had to here in California, but we did. And yet what happened in all the mountain communities? People went. We were supposed to stay at home, and yet everybody went to these mountain communities and we weren't open. So I told them, and I think this really helped us get what we needed, was if you close us down, you're not going to shut people from going down or from people going up there. They're still going to go. They're just not going to have a place where we have all this space and all this organization to manage them. And we've spent 9 months preparing for this, but that sledding hill or all these places where they could go without any direction has done nothing. So let us be open because of that.
That's an excellent point. And I do have a question toward the end around newcomers and people coming to the resort, you know, with what you just talked about from April, we're going to jump into right before we close today. So I wanted to just ask Nathan, while we're kind of on the topic that we are looking at just what we talked about on the panel in Q4 of last year that SIA held with resort operators. One of the biggest questions was in regards to transporting people, you know, from Salt Lake or whatever, you know, the driving distance, if you will, getting up to the areas. And you obviously have some canyons to deal with. And I'm just curious to know, like, how has that been going for you? Because that's something that a lot of people had some questions on, and it was an area of interest back in the fall.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's certainly been a challenge, of course. And at Ski Utah, we've been proactive, you know, doing everything we can up to middle of March or this ski season to get people to carpool and ride the bus. And now we tell people don't carpool, especially employees, and public transportation. Luckily, we've been really lucky. So the local transportation authority, UTA, has continued to run their bus service, albeit at limited numbers. And we've certainly seen limited numbers riding the bus. And we've also seen parking lots filling up quicker. So that's been a challenge. One thing we're really lucky with here is that our skiers are so close to the urban centers. Mom can literally, if the roads are dry, go drive their kids up to Alta, drop them off, leave them up there, have fun all day, drive back up and get them in the afternoon. It's 15 minutes from the city. And another thing that's been an advantage, although a little disappointing for those of us who like to ski powder, is we just haven't had huge amounts of snow this year, which, you know, again, the theme of cutting both ways has left crowds a little bit less, and then also reduced the amount of issues we've had in some of our canyons. Although last night it snowed, you know, an inch or two in just an hour, and it resulted in a, you know, 2-hour delay coming down some of our canyons. It just doesn't take much. And so it's an issue that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, but we're just, you know, approaching it a different way. And from a PR standpoint, we're also seeing people spread their day out and ski differently. You know, I've skied more in the afternoon this year than I ever have. And, you know, we're seeing also people who are choosing to work remotely, which are a lot of us, and they're able to do lunchtime laps. They don't feel like they have to be on the 9 o'clock chair so they can be back at work by 11:30. And we're seeing, you know, little traffic rushes at different times of the day in the afternoons, and night skiing's been all time as well. So things have changed, and you know, it's been interesting. And in the transportation vein, I'll also just mention we've got a new airport here in Salt Lake City, couple $1 billion new airport. And I was out there the other day. From a transportation perspective, our airport, the gentleman that runs our airport there said we are currently the busiest airport in the United States in relation to how busy they had been in the past. And so luckily we're a hub, and it certainly has not slowed down with people coming here to ski.
Would anybody else like to weigh in on kind of the challenges of transporting skiers and riders up to resorts?
You know, one thing I just jump in and say, Nathan really captured how it's changed behavior, challenges with transportation, sensitivity on the part of guests in being on a shuttle bus or on a bus in general, even if it's loaded at 50% capacity, for example. People don't necessarily space themselves out so that it looks like it's only loaded at 50% capacity. We have a challenge ahead of us as an industry to get people back to ride sharing and carpooling and taking transit. All of our sustainability efforts as an industry to really reduce our impact on the transportation sector have kind of been dialed down this year because people need to be thinking about their health and their family's health. And we've got to keep that on the front burner going forward. We don't want to lose too much time on our sustainability efforts.
That's a really good point. And that's definitely something that I'm sure that both SIA and OIA will be offering materials, guidance, training on to membership going forward. That's a really excellent point. Anybody else want to weigh in on transporting skiers and riders, or are we good on that?
You know, we don't have that issue here in California so much. I mean, only a few spots, but I just want to say to kind of dovetail what Melanie said, we'll need some kind of maybe campaign as a group. Maybe, you know, when we can really tell people, let's get back together. Whatever we do with that, whatever campaigns we'll come up with, we really do need to tie that into some type of sustainability piece that shows like, okay, we're all ready to head up to the mountain again together. So let's actually do it together rather than just jumping in a bunch of individual cars.
And I would just add that, you know, we have, you know, part of the pre-visit communications has been letting people know that, you know, inside spaces are lower capacity. And we've been telling people, you know, you need to prepare for this and really to use your vehicle as a base lodge. So, you know, the couple times that I've been skiing, you know, I've noticed that, you know, you pull in and wow, the parking lot, it seems like there's a lot of people here, but then you get up on the hill and it's like, where is everybody? Well, I think people are not carpooling as much as they have been, and they've been realizing that, you know, I need my vehicle so that I can go warm up if I can't get into the base lodge.
That's super interesting. And on that note, you just totally teed up the next question. So thank you for that, Molly. I was wanting to touch base with you on communications. That's something we really talked a lot about as we were going into the holidays. Consumer communication as well as workforce communication. But let's, you know, you guys can kind of take, you know, this wherever you think will bring the most value to the audience. But obviously working on setting expectations is super important. Follow up and follow through is important. What are some of the key channels that have worked? How have you utilized or trained your workforce to be messengers on this? Like, can you share some of the things that this is the type of information that I really think could actually affect people's businesses in a really positive way right now?
I'm off mute first, so I'll jump in. I think, you know, this was something that was trending within our industry before, which is more transparency and really being overly transparent in how you talk to people, like not being afraid to just tell it to them straight. I've seen some of that communication from a bunch of our resorts, and it's been so accepted. Everyone's just happy that they're being told the way it is. And because we knew we had to get out that know before you go message, and all the states I think have done a really great job of that, because that's been the number one key was, hey, let them know everything they need to know before they do go. So I think that's been the key one. So I think maybe just that concept of you know, people are pretty smart these days and they see communication from so many different places. And I think when they key in on the one they realize is truth to them and is fact, that they really absorb that well. And I think it just helps, whether it's a brand, a ski area, it doesn't really matter. It's that type of communication that you're using with them that works really well. And we've seen tremendous guest response because of that.
Yeah, I would add on to what Mike said too. You know, I think transparency is key through all of our PR messaging. You know, when you give that interview and they say, hey, is there anything else to add? Sometimes I'm stumped, but every time this year we talk about patience and gratitude, and that people need to understand that things are different, and that they, you know, we're thankful to have skiing at all this year. There are a lot of industries that we don't have, and doing that. And I can't tell you how many times I've used the phrase that this is our first pandemic. And I think that softens a lot of people. They understand okay, you know, the ski industry is no different than anybody else. We're just figuring this out ourselves as well. And you know, you kind of soften that message a little bit. One thing that's really helped us as an industry here in Utah is that we're small enough that all our resorts can really be on the same page and strike the same tone. So we have a text message between the resort, all the resort GMs. And what we were worried about at the beginning was that some ski areas might take a different approach to mask, you know, wearing, and that, you know, one resort might be known as the place to go if you didn't or did want to wear a mask or whatever it was. But I've been really happy to report that everybody here has been diligent, and I think it helps instill confidence in the consumer that they know whether it's to Snowbird or Alta, Snow Basin or Deer Valley, that they're going to be required to wear a mask and kind of have the same procedures. So there's, you know, there's no new learning process when you go from one resort to the next, at least as it in regards to the outdoor procedures.
Let me jump in on that and riff a little bit on Nathan's comment. You know, one thing we were surprised about, and we talked a lot about it on our state association calls for a number of weeks, was how demanding and constant the masking message has been. We tell people before they arrive in multiple different ways. It's all over our social media feeds. You've got to wear a mask. It's a requirement in the state of Colorado. And yet, you know, it took a while initially with early season skiers to train that muscle memory that when you get to the end of a run and you're approaching the lift maze, you got to pull your mask on again. The amount of reminding that is required is constant, and that has taken a toll on our employees. Just day in and day out, thousands of times, we're asking people to put their masks on, to cover their nose and mouth. By and large, our skiers and snowboarders are really cooperative with the message. We're not encountering really significant resistance to that message. Then every time that it's, you know, if it's a holiday week or a holiday weekend or a particular time of year when folks from a certain destination tend to come and visit, you've got to start all over again with that messaging. The local skiers kind of get it down, and then you've got to educate the new influx of skiers who come every single day. So just the constancy of the same message. Our PR efforts with our PR teams this year have been much less about come on up and ski, the snow's great, come on out and have some fun, there's this great new restaurant or there's this great new thing to do. It's much more about COVID messaging, behavioral messaging, what to expect messaging. And I like Nathan's patience and gratitude messaging. We might adopt that over here to the east of Utah as well.
Yeah, and I would add that it has kind of pushed the communications efforts into a weird place this year, because we're saying many of the things that we're not used to saying, you know, especially we're trying to kind of balance a fine line here in Vermont. You know, business has been down because of the restrictions, but you don't want too much business because that's bad from a COVID standpoint. So, you know, it's just been kind of a weird, you know, like we were having a conversation in our office, you know, the first time it snowed, it's like, what do we do? You know, we're so used to, you know, getting that stoke out, and we're like, we probably shouldn't be doing that to the degree that we normally do, because it's just not responsible. And I just wanted to add too, that it's, I think an important piece of the messaging has been just asking skiers and riders for their cooperation and following these rules and being mindful of their shared responsibility in this, so that we can have a complete ski season. Because, you know, if we're not following the rules and we run into problems, that's where we're going to not be skiing for a full year. So we really need people to, you know, don't wait to be told to wear your mask, you know, please. And it does require constant reminding, but I think, as Melanie was saying, it's getting better as the season goes on. But, you know, when we're seeing people that maybe haven't been skiing much this season, they need reminding as well.
And just to close the loop on that, any anybody have anything to offer in terms of keeping the frontline workers really continuing to fight that fight? Because I know obviously we've had political issues. We've also, had the problem of just the congestion online and everybody getting their information in a new way, but most of them are finding it online. And the fact that we've gone from 8 to 11 impressions and this like 7-second, less than a goldfish attention span to needing to do like 20 to 40 impressions, seriously, just to stay in front of them. And as you said, train that muscle memory. What about your teams that are like working at the resorts? Like, obviously that is a very exhausting place to be if you're fighting that fight every day. Any tips there?
Yeah, I can address that really quick. We know it's wearing on them big time. I mean, I know after the holidays, everyone said that there was serious COVID fatigue. You talk about fatigue just in general on the public, but it's really nothing to the people that are spending all of their days trying to get the public to do the right thing. So I think this is an opportunity for resorts, and then even beyond that, to all types of businesses to recognize how important it is to take care of your people, to really look at how are you going to keep them in a good way when they have every reason not to be. And I think it really comes from leadership. And I've seen such great leadership from some of our resorts to help those people get through it. I mean, we got to keep asking them the same thing you're asking the public in some ways is, stick with us. We can do this. This skiing and riding is important. The season's important, and you guys are the only way we're going to keep this going. So I think telling them that, and doing some things that show that's there. This year we're doing our Ski California Safety Days on Saturday, and the theme is respect. And that goes for the skiers and riders themselves with each other, but even more so for the employees. I think it's something I'd like to see continued on beyond this year. That we've had. Let's just say we've had a few years where people haven't been all that nice to each other. And maybe it's time we as an industry really decide that we're going to be part of changing and to make sure it's not acceptable at our areas, that we're just not going to put up with that. So I think this year, we're not putting up with people that won't wear their mask. So let's just not put up with people that are going to be assholes in the future.
And we've really been trying to, when we have an interview opportunity, to stress, please follow the employee directives and follow the signage. I mean, signs are everywhere, but it makes a difference this year. And there are some new restrictions and new procedures, but they're all in place for everyone's well-being. And don't give the employees a hard time. It's like, be patient. You're not going to be able to necessarily walk in the base lodge when you want to. We all have to just recognize that we're lucky that we're skiing, and we need to really give the employees a break when they're asking us to do things. We're not doing them a favor. We're keeping everybody skiing.
That's fantastic. So one of the questions that I had, I think you just addressed, and I want to make sure we keep time for the newcomers, but it was on the retail, hospitality, and rental, and the fact that, we've seen some pretty fantastic technology stood up in order to get people to, do a lot of the paperwork and a lot of the onboarding online. But I think that you just basically addressed like my question, which was, how do we continue to offer that specialty experience? How do we continue to humanize that experience for the people who are, coming to our resorts and expect that? And I love, respect, patience, gratitude, all of those things really tie into the fact that we are like a passion industry, and there's reciprocity there. I think the fact that they can see that you're really, really fighting to keep this opportunity open for them, hopefully there's reciprocity there. And I just want to put a, shout out to all of the people who are working with the public right now, because it is definitely not easy. So anything we can do to caretake our workforce, I think is going to go a long way, because that continuity and this experience is going to make them even better at their jobs in the future. So if anyone has anything to add on that, on retail, hospitality, and rental, that can be its own panel. But if you want to throw in anything, great. If not, we'll go on to the newcomers. All right, we're going to go to the newcomers. So obviously, across all facets of outdoor recreation, we've seen big jumps in participation from consumers. We did address this, I believe, in a couple panels in Q3 and Q4 of last year. And we have all seen great demand in terms of people, buying product to walk around on the snow, just in case they couldn't go to a resort. Now we are seeing resorts open, but we still have to deal with, I think, people being on snow, maybe in a way that we weren't ready for or prepared for or had a solution or a system for. So I wanted to make sure that we address that, because we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the newcomers. And I just want to kind of keep this an open conversation. We have about 10 minutes left. Whatever you think would be most additive to the membership who are tuned into us today here would be the best thing to offer. So it's obviously a challenge. It's an opportunity, and some of it is out of our control, but I just thought I would throw it out there as a learning opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, Kristin, for me, this was one of the questions that we had early that I kind of thought the most about. And at the outset, I thought, man, maybe we just failed on this one. But I don't think that's the case. Again, the theme, there's good and bad. The bad for us at Ski Utah and for a lot of the associations that some of those past products that we sold were either clipped or modified. So in Utah, we sell these 5th and 6th grade passports. We normally sell 10,000 of them a year, and they're good for 3 lift tickets at each resort in the state. Our resorts this year decided, we really needed to modify those so we didn't see a crush on the weekends, and modified it so they were blacked out on weekends, and the result of that is that we've sold, just over 4,000 as opposed to 10,000 of those passes. So, I'd throw that in the tough category. Those are the passes that help kids get on the hill that maybe, that we want to create as lifelong skiers. And we've canceled our 4th grade passport altogether, which was a program that was in schools that got kids, and sometimes kids that might not often get the chance to go skiing up on the hill. So we're going to have to circle the wagons come next year and make sure those programs are in place. The good side, I'd say, is that, just like you said, the reinvigoration of the outdoors. I talked to one resort that claimed that of their passes that they sold, of their season passes that they sold, over 40% were to individuals who had not owned a season pass in the past. And if that's not an opportunity, I don't know what is. And, I think our strategy mostly here at Ski Utah has been to continue to market to and offer, some kind of product and let people know that skiing is going to be available without going totally dark, but also try to take advantage of the opportunity without looking like we're taking advantage of the opportunity, and just kind of keep moving forward. And I think that's going to pay off for all of us in the future.
We have to keep in mind they haven't had the buffet yet. Like, they're pretty open to the experience they're having, which is kind of cool. Anybody else like to weigh in on that? Thank you, Nathan. That was super helpful.
Yeah, I would echo Nathan's comments. And one observation here in Colorado, particularly over the holidays this year, we saw a real influx of people newcomers to the resorts who came up to do snow play. Even though numbers can be a little bit restricted for skiers and snowboarders, we can't have enough tubing. We can't have enough mountain coasters. We cannot have enough opportunities for families and people who want to get outside and try some of these things, and they're fun and they're accessible. And it's been a big year on that front. And that we'll see if that creates an opportunity for us to get these folks into the sport more in the future.
We've also seen a transition to offering less group lessons because of obvious reasons, and more private and semi-private opportunities. And so, if you're a beginner, that's going to give you the instructor's undivided attention versus being part of a group lesson too. So just maybe a better experience starting out.
Yeah, I think the variety of products that have had to come out because of that, to what Molly said, that you can't necessarily just offer the straight half full day private lesson because not everybody can afford that. So you're not going to really bring in enough newcomers, and certainly you're not broadening that base. So I think a lot of the resorts have pivoted to just different types of lessons they can offer, especially here in California. The restrictions on what we can do with lessons are pretty tight. It's been tough to develop lesson programs that are going to work for everyone. So we've really had a big challenge there. I'd say that this is just another good example of trying to take the things that maybe were somewhat forced upon the industry as a whole and use those to your benefit in the future. I think that, we're as an industry pretty good at customer service, I think. And we were able to add some elements to customer service, making things a little more streamlined, and really that messaging we got out to guests about planning in advance. When you plan in advance, you're able to show customer service in such a better way because they're prepared, you're prepared, and they're like, wow, look how dialed they have this system down. So we can keep using that in the future about, using the technology to make sure that they're ready to go. So when they get there, they have a more pleasant experience. I mean, starting skiing can be tough, skiing and riding, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. So the more we can use what we've learned this year to make that process easier for the guest, next year, we could see a pretty big influx of people when you take the people that have dabbled with the sport a little bit this year, maybe for the first time, combined with what we hope to be everyone able to just come up and not be saddled with a huge number of restrictions. There's a really good opportunity next year to have a big base added to our industry. But if we're not ready to handle it from a technology and a process standpoint, we could actually make their experience worse.
That's all fantastic learning. And I can't wait to have a panel like after things settle down to talk about the things we're going to move into next season intentionally, because you just hit on the perfect point. And I also just want to say, I have so much respect for the fact that you all have built consumer trust through a really difficult time by, as you said, kind of taking what you've had to work with and really engineering it into a place where people know they're in good hands. They're in like this container of safety when they come to a resort, whether it's for snow play or whatever else they're going to do there. And then I wanted to just thank you for extending your group therapy. I think we have potentially one of the biggest group therapy sessions that's ever happened in snow sports that has just happened here today with this panel. And it was very nice to allow all of us to come in. And keep in mind, everybody, that there's always a 50% contrast, good and bad. And we have so much to learn. And I think that's where our panelists really, really showed us today, like, take the good and the bad and do everything you can to push it forward, because the consumer is counting on that experience. We're helping them fall deeper in love with the outdoors and re-identify as, this is a place I belong. And I think for years, we maybe didn't have that as accessible as it is right now. And I just really want to applaud all of you for really rolling out that red carpet to everybody and opening the portal for more people to come in, because that's just going to set us up for success in the future. So last point, thank you so much for your time, and seeing the collaboration between the states that has happened on a level it never has been is definitely one of the key takeaways of this panel. That and staying super tight to your state government and tight communication and bending over backwards to do things for them before they ask, building that trust with them. These are all really, really key takeaways that I think really will help us all in our businesses, no matter what we do in outdoor and snow sports. So please know how grateful we are for your time and for being on the front lines and keeping this opportunity open for our consumers. Thank you so much for your time today. Okay.